If you will all please be seated, we'll now jump into our main study today, which, as I said, is a continuation, really part 3 of this study we've been having in regard to Gog and Magog and the wars with Gog and Magog. But it kind of is moving on from the subject of Gog and Magog and really kind of looking at the return of the Messiah, the end time judgments, etc. And I would like to start our examination of some of these scriptures in the book of Isaiah. If you look at chapter 2, and again, this is meant to be an open study, so if I'm reading through anything and something pops out at you, please feel free to stop me and jump in. I'd like to encourage a dialogue so that, iron will sharpen iron, because as I've always said, I do not hold the keys to the kingdom, or I don't own a copyright on the truth, for sure. So I am a student as much as, I try to teach people. I'm learning as well, so we all learn from one another. So we'll start Isaiah chapter 2, verse 1. The word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of Jehovah shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. So there is a day coming, and that day has not come that I'm aware of, where God's holy city will be the main place of worship for the entire planet, and all nations will come into it. And many peoples, verse 3, shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of Jehovah, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of Jehovah from Jerusalem. So this idea that the nations will come, everyone will be there, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. You see, up to this point, we're all walking in our own way, and in our own path, or the path of some apostate preacher that is teaching a lie for the truth. You see, deception is one of the core character traits of Satan. First and foremost, he's the father of lies. He's a deceiver. And these deceptions are subtle. They're not always matter of fact. And I have these preachers that contact me quite often, and a lot of them are in Africa, and they contact me, and they have no concept of what it is we believe. And, they always, talk about believers and that type of thing. And I tell them, believing is just the beginning, right? That's the beginning. You then have to obey. You have to walk in his paths. You have to do his ways and follow his law. And that's where the world has gone awry. And we talked earlier about the hopelessness of young people in this day and age, because they've been taught that there is no God. Their reliance or their hope is in the government. And when they look at what goes on in the government, how can you not but be hopeless or feel hopeless? Because it's And you know, I'm going to be somewhat disrespectful here. It's like a clown show. These people, you know, it's hard to believe they you know, achieved all that they've achieved. But it's because I think there's a bigger agenda, but we'll not go down that rabbit hole. But the law shall go forth from Jerusalem, right? And so it'll be the center of worship for the planet. He says he will judge between the nations and shall decide disputes for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. And this is what I was reading earlier, I was talking to you guys about. And their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So there's a day coming when we are going to return to a simple way of life. An agrarian society, I think. You know, what we consider progress is just a very wide path to self-destruction.
When we look at images from Ukraine and we see all these tanks and armored vehicles destroyed, I mean, that's a lot of plowshare. I mean, that's a lot of plowshare, really.
That's right. Yeah, we'll have ample tools.
I think it said at one point, I don't remember exactly where, but for 7 years, I mean, they would use this as fuel or something like this.
Yeah, we read that. I think it was in Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's you know, it's such a foreign way of life when we think about it.
But coming back to what you mentioned regarding young people, there are big elections here on October 3rd, I think in Quebec, and young people are not interested in voting because, I mean, as you said, they're clowns. I mean, they're not sincere people. They tell you they're there for you, but in fact, I mean, they're there for them. So the young people are not interested.
Yeah, you know, that scripture where Christ was castigating the Pharisees, I think it was, when he said, you are children of your father the devil. And you know, and that's it. They are. These people lead the nation astray. They don't set an example. They're corrupt and evil. Continuing in verse 5, O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of Yehovah. Won't that be a spectacular time when the whole earth is just trying to get a better understanding of the way of life that we should be living and being at peace with one another and really practicing the principles that are espoused in the Bible. That will be something that, you know, we've never seen. Continuing in verse 6, he says, for you have rejected your people, the house of Jacob. And so let's remember, right? The house of Jacob is what was the northern 10 tribes of Israel. Because we have to remember, you know, Israel is just not that little sliver of land over there in the Middle East that is called Israel. But, you know, Judah and Benjamin kind of split off. So we had the 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and then we had all the others that were the northern 10 tribes that were then carried off and never returned to their ancestral land, right? So we've been scattered, and they didn't just cease to exist. They're still there, and they play a role in prophecy. And this house of Jacob is what was those northern 10 tribes. It says, for you have rejected your people, the house of Jacob, because they are full of things from the east and of fortune tellers like the Philistines, and they strike hands with the children of foreigners. Now this is very interesting because there seems to be a fascination in the Western world with these Eastern mystery religions, with, you know, the religions from India. You know, everybody's into yoga, and I mean, some forms of yoga are nothing more than, you know, it's nothing more than trying to channel spirits. And it's very much akin to speaking in tongues and the things that you see in some of these Protestant churches, right? And this is why God has rejected us, because we are full of the things from the East and the fortune tellers like the Philistines, right? These people, these prognosticators. And so anytime you start to see this type of thing, you better be thinking, because we are to have nothing to do with that kind of activity. He says their land is filled with silver and gold. This is the land of Jacob. Who has been the most prosperous on the planet? The Western world. And there is no end to their treasures, and their land is filled with horses, and there is no end to their chariots. Their land is filled with idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their own fingers have made. Right? They have become so arrogant. They claim they don't even need God. And continuing in verse 9, he says, so man is humbled, and each one is brought low. Do not forgive them. That's pretty strong language. He says, enter into the rock, verse 10, and hide in the dust from before the terror of Yehovah and from the splendor of his majesty. The haughty looks of man shall be brought low. This pride and arrogance that man has will be brought low. And the lofty pride of men shall be humbled. And Yehovah alone will be exalted in that day. Gone will be the days when we say, we will rebuild, we will overcome. We can get by without God. Those days will be over. And only when man recognizes his need for the higher power of our Father in heaven will we ever have any peace and justice in this world. Verse 12, for Yehovah Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, has a day against all that is proud and lofty. A little humility goes a long way. Against all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low. Look at what he did to Nebuchadnezzar. You know, made him like an animal. I think for 7 years he just lived out and ate grass, wandered around out in the field like a crazy person. You get a little too uppity and God can bring you down. There's no doubt. And he will. Verse 13, against all the cedars of Lebanon, lofty and lifted up, these leaders of Lebanon, and against all the oaks of Bashan, against the lofty mountains, and against all the uplifted hills, against every high tower, and against every fortified wall, against all the ships of Tarshish, and against all the beautiful craft. Right? The ships of Tarshish is a reference to the economy, right? They were merchant ships. And so this has to do with trade and commerce. And the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, and the lofty pride of men shall be brought low, and Yehovah alone will be exalted in that day. That's the second time it said that. Verse 18, and the idols shall utterly pass away. So all of these things that we have put in the place of God, including ourselves, right? So we've talked about this before, about how we put ourselves in the place of God. And the Catholics especially, in their own writing, have said that the Pope has the authority to change times, seasons, has the authority to basically change anything that God said. And that Christ has to obey the Catholic priests. So now they are controlling God. And they sit in the place of God. And, there are interesting things developing. And I think we're going to see more and more influence from the Catholic Church, and how influential they have been is going to be revealed as we move forward. And at some point, they're not going to be hiding anymore. And I think that's when, our lives are going to get more difficult for sure. But they put themselves, and this is the arrogance they have. They put themselves in the place of God and then tell everybody they have the keys of the kingdom. So you have to do what they say or you're going to hell. That's kind of their thing. It says, "And the idols shall utterly pass away, and people shall enter the caves of the rocks and the holes of the ground from before the terror of Jehovah and from the splendor of his majesty when he rises to terrify the earth. In that day mankind will cast away their idols of silver and their idols of gold, which they have made for themselves to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to enter the caverns of the rocks and the clefts of the cliffs from before the terror of Jehovah and from the splendor of his majesty when he rises to terrify the earth. Stop regarding man, in whose nostrils is breath, for of what account is he? Stop regarding man." People listen to these politicians, these leaders, both civil and religious, as if they are God. They follow blindly. Stop regarding man. You see, we are fallible. We'd make mistakes. We can be deceived. And if people follow us, they can follow people right into the second resurrection. This is a pretty strong indictment. Stop regarding man, in whose nostrils is breath. For what account is he? Nobody can stand between you and your Creator. Your salvation is between you and your Creator. And I'm not going to be held accountable for your actions. However, I'm going to be accountable for anything I say and do. And if it causes any of you to go astray, I'm going to be held accountable for that. So, and I don't take that lightly. And that's why I tread very carefully. Okay, moving on here. Let's turn over to chapter 11. And again, feel free to chime in with any input or insight. We'll look at the righteous reign of the branch. In Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse." Right? Jesse was the father of David. "And a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of Jehovah shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of Jehovah. And his delight shall be in the fear of Jehovah. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. So, there will be no room for false witness, because he's not going to judge based on the things he hears and sees. It's going to be based on righteousness. And that righteousness is defined by the law of God. Both we'll call it the spiritual intent and the physical. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. And, this was always a thing in the worldwide church of God. Verse 6, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. It's going to be a very different world than what we live in now. And this is what we have to look forward to. And while it is intimidating and probably a little scary to think about what has to transpire between now and then, the end result is going to be something really amazing. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand to the adder's den, or on the adder's den. And this verse 9 is so wonderful, right? They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of Yehovah, as the waters cover the sea. So there's a day coming when this spirit of violence that covers the earth today will no longer exist. And there will be no more killing. There will be no more sadness, no more war. It's almost unfathomable to our minds that have been conditioned with, the world we grew up in. Verse 10, in that day, the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. In that day, the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time, and recover the remnants that remains of his people, from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea. Right? These coastlands of the sea. The United States is a giant island, right? And all of these nations are. So all of his people, they're going to be regathered. Or at least that's the implication here. He will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel. They were carried off into captivity for their apostasy and their modification of the calendar, keeping the feast in the 8th month. He will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The jealousy of Ephraim shall depart, and those who harass Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not be jealous of Judah, and Judah will not harass Ephraim. And they will swoop down on the shoulder of the Philistines in the west, and together they shall plunder the people of the east. They shall put out their hand against Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites shall obey them. And Yehovah will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and will wave his hand over the river with a scorching breath, and strike it into 7 channels. And he will lead people across in sandals. So a way will be made for people to come back into the promised land. And there will be a highway from Assyria for the remnant of the remains, or remnant that remains of his people, as there was for Israel when they came up from the land of Egypt. So after this judgment on the house of Jacob and the end time conflict with Gog and Magog, people are going to return to the promised land. At least that's the way it reads. Chapter 13. Let's go there. And Wes has been reading through the book of Isaiah, so we covered this, over the last few weeks. Let's start off in verse 1 here. The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. So this is concerning Babylon. On a bare hill raise a signal. Cry aloud to them. Wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself have commanded my consecrated ones, and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. Now, is this, are these human beings? Are they angels? I don't know. The sound of a tumult is on the mountains as of a great multitude, the sound of an uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathering together. Yehovah Sabaoth is mustering a host for battle. They come from a distant land, from the ends of the heavens. Yehovah and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. Now, we read previously in Ezekiel and other places where God told Gog and Magog to be ready because he's going to send them to punish Jacob. Wail, for the day of Yehovah is near, verse 6. As destruction from the Almighty, it will come. Therefore, all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt. They will be dismayed. We were talking earlier about that hopelessness. They will be dismayed. Pangs of agony will seize them. They will be in anguish like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at one another. Their faces will be aflamed. So look at what's happening in Ukraine, how much those people feel. We see the images on television and things, and we don't really know if it's propaganda, if it's real, but we see human suffering. And you can bet there's going to be plenty of that. Wail, for the day of Yehovah is near. As destruction from the Almighty, it will come. Therefore, all hands will be feeble. Every human heart will melt. They will be dismayed. Pangs and agony will seize them. They will be in anguish like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at one another. Their faces will be aflame. Behold, the day of Yehovah comes, cruel, with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. When Yehovah does come, he's using his instruments to punish Jacob and his people for their disobedience. Just like he's done time and time again throughout biblical history. It's just another iteration of the same thing. But it's culminating. His plan is almost complete. Verse 10, for the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant, and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. That is a strong message to all of these politicians and would-be leaders out there. Verse 12, I will make people more rare than fine gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. You talk about decreasing the population of the planet. Therefore, I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place at the wrath of Yehovah Sabaoth in the day of his fierce anger. And like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with none to gather them, each will turn to his own people, and each will flee to his own land. Whoever is found will be thrust through, and whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Now, that's been done before. Their houses will be plundered and their wives ravished. Behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. Their bows will slaughter the young men. They will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb, and their eyes will not pity children. And that happened, right? The fall of the kingdom of Babylon. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor of the pomp and the Chaldeans, or of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there, no shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. But wild animals will lie down there, and their houses will be full of howling creatures. There ostriches will dwell, and there wild goats will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant places. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. So there are times coming that are not unlike times that have been, as we've discussed. Whatever was will be again, and whatever is now has been before. There is nothing new under the sun. And so these judgments that have been pronounced on Babylon and Israel in the past are coming again. Let's look at chapter 35. The ransom shall return. Verse 1, the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of Yehovah, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you. That's our hope, is that we are saved and kept safe from these end-time tribulations that are coming. And when I say end time, it's the end of an age, and we've discussed this before. It's not the end of the world as many would characterize it. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals, where they lie down, the grass shall become reeds and rushes. So all of this destroyed planet is going to be redone. It's going to be rejuvenated, brought back to its former beauty. And a highway shall be there, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of Jehovah shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Now this I believe speaks of that return of God's people that are left at the return of Christ. When Christ comes and puts a stop to this judgment on Jacob, he prevents Gog and Magog from destroying them utterly and punishes them. And he's bringing the people back to their promised land that he promised to their forefathers. Let's look at 65 and 66. The two final chapters of the book of Isaiah. Verse 1 in chapter 65 says, I was ready to be sought by those who did not ask for me. I was ready to be found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation that was not called by my name. And that's another thing that we've discussed in the past. This deception of Satan is so complete that what seems good is not going to be good. And we see it, and these things are going to be revealed as we move forward, I believe. And the things that we've kind of leaned on as good pillars, I guess, in our world, in our society, are going to be revealed for a falsehood. Things that appear to be icons of righteousness, of godly love, of freedom, liberty, all of these things are going to be used to persecute the people of God. And we'll watch and see how it all develops, but just beware that this facade that Satan has created is so complete that, as it says in Scripture, if it were possible, even the very elect would be deceived. So it says, I spread out my hands all the day to a rebellious people who walk in a way that is not good, following their own devices. I will determine for myself what is right and wrong. And look at what we have in our society. We scratch our heads and we wonder how in the world anybody can look at that and say, wow, that's good, or that's proper. It's amazing. A people who provoke me to my face continually, sacrificing in gardens and making offerings on bricks, who sit in tombs and spend the night in secret places, who eat pig's flesh. Should we be eating bacon and eggs? Well, maybe turkey bacon. But we shouldn't be eating pig's flesh. That's not something that is looked upon as being a good thing here. And broth of tainted meat is in their vessels, who say, keep to yourself, do not come near me, for I am too holy for you. These are a smoke in my nostrils and fire that burns all the day. These modern religious institutions are an affront to our Creator. And they espouse things that are considered an aberration by our Father. Behold, it is written before me. I will not keep silent, but I will repay. I will indeed repay into their lap both your iniquities and your father's iniquities together, says Jehovah. Because they made offerings on the mountains and insulted me on the hills, I will measure into their lap payment for their former deeds. You see, all of these things that we're doing aren't going unnoticed. And our society and the people in it are going to be judged, and it's going to be with a harsh judgment. So if we care about anybody in this world, we should be praying for God to open their eyes. Our leaders, we were talking earlier, we need to be praying for our leaders that they not be allowed to continue in their ignorance or in their evil. I don't know which. Maybe both. Verse 8, thus says Jehovah, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and they say, do not destroy it, for there is a blessing in it. So I will do for my servants' sake, and not destroy them all. For my servants' sake. You see, we are meant to be a blessing on this planet, not a curse. I will bring forth offspring from Jacob and from Judah, possessors of my mountains. My chosen shall possess it, and my servants shall dwell there. And this again speaks to a return to the promised land. Sharon shall become a pasture for flocks, and the valley of Achor a place for herds to lie down, for my people who have sought me. But you who forsake Jehovah, who forget my holy mountain, who set a table for fortune and fill cups of mixed wine for destiny, I will destine you to the sword, and all of you shall bow down to the slaughter. Because when I called, you did not answer. When I spoke, you did not listen. But you did what was evil in my eyes and chose what I did not delight in. So anybody hearing this message, there's a calling that you're being called to. Are you going to listen? Are you going to answer that calling? And I don't want to sound too cliche or too much like a televangelist, but there is truth in this scripture. And that is what we're called to. So I would encourage everyone to answer that calling. Verse 13, therefore, thus says Adonai Yehovah, behold, my servants shall eat, but you shall be hungry. Behold, my servants shall drink, but you shall be thirsty. Behold, my servants shall rejoice, but you shall be put to shame. Behold, my servants shall sing for gladness of heart, but you shall cry out for pain of heart, and shall wail for breaking of spirit. You shall leave your name to my chosen for a curse. And Adonai Yehovah will put you to death, but his servants he will call by another name. We're going to get a new name. So that he who blesses himself in the land shall bless himself by the God of truth. And he who takes an oath in the land shall swear by the God of truth, because the former troubles are forgotten and are hidden from my eyes. And this is always a beautiful scene that is painted here in Isaiah. Verse 17, for behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come to mind. And this is not the same new heavens and new earth in the book of Revelation. Those come down from heaven. This is created here on this earth. At least that's what my studies have revealed to me. said, but be glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem to be a joy and her people to be a gladness. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and be glad in my people. No more shall be heard in it the sound of weeping and the cry of distress. No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. For the young man shall die 100 years old, right? If you die at 100 years old, you're considered a young man. And the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed. Same concept, only being cursed instead of dying young. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. Right? Gone are the days of the IRS coming and stealing your house. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. This implies that in the millennial period, after the return of Christ, man is going to live like he did prior to the flood. That's my understanding. They shall not labor, verse 23, in vain or bear children for calamity, for they shall be the offspring of the blessed of Jehovah, and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. And again, we have the reference to the wolf and the lamb. The wolf and the lamb shall graze together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox, and the dust shall be the serpent's food. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountains, says Jehovah. What a glorious time that's going to be.
Dave, on verse 20, when it said there should be no more dense and infinite days, nor an old man that has not filled his days, for the child should die 100 years old. Wouldn't that be the lifespan of that child? Because if the child's not going to die young, he would have been 100 years old when he's dying.
Well, it says a young man shall die 100 years old.
Well, it's telling you that the young man's not going to die. An infant's not going to die of age. So it's saying that, I read that's going to be our lifespan, the people's lifespan at that time. Because the sinner's going to be accursed 100 years old. So if you're sinning, you're going to live your 100 years accursed. And if you're a child, you're born and you're going to live 100 years.
But if you're, why would a young man die at 100 years old? Wouldn't that be an old man if that's your lifespan?
Well, I'm just saying, a child, I'm looking at it that you're born a child and then you live your life on and die in 100 years. Nor should an old man have not filled all his days. Yeah,
see, I guess I'm looking at it the other way around.
Yeah.
Right? It says no more will infants die in infanthood, or an old man who does not fill out his days. For the young man shall die at 100 years old. So if you die at 100 years old, you're considered young. Oh, he died way too young. and part of the reason I say that is because of what it says here. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. And as I've said before, trees live thousands of years in a lot of cases. So
the lifespan of a maple tree is 100 years. So I guess it would be, there's older ones, but usually they say a forest is like the average tree in our area is like 100 years. Like a maple tree or a beech tree or an ash tree.
Yeah, but I think you have to look at things from the perspective of where these guys were located, right? They weren't located here in North America. And we all know that the trees in and around Jerusalem tend to live a long time. So, I mean, it's not critical for salvation purposes, right? But I believe that, and when you read pre-flood, Methuselah lived 969 years. You know, if he had died at 100 years, he would have been considered way too young to be dying. It'd be like me dying at 15 or something, you know?
No, and I see your point also. I mean, just, so what you're saying is that they could live through the whole millennium.
Yeah.
Jerry, we have produced a paper on this subject that actually Isaiah 65 that was written by Dave. But when you go through the whole paper, then I mean you will see that I mean it probably means I mean 1,000 years, something like this, more than 100 years. But I would invite you to look at the paper, and we can certainly discuss that maybe next week.
And also, to your point, Jerry, one of the things I was thinking about this morning actually was, so you have these people that are alive that live over into the millennium. Now, unless God supernaturally intervenes in their life processes and their genetics, they're going to die at a normal time, 80 years old, whatever, right? The children that are brought into the world during the millennium, I think, are the ones that are going to live those old ages. Now, this is all speculation. And I was thinking about it because, you know, at the end of the millennium, Satan's loosed again to deceive the nations. And so somehow these people that have been alive for all these years have to be open to being deceived, right? And I was thinking about it. It could be that, you know, you have this younger generation that just doesn't hold the same values that the old people do, and they look at them and they say, man, you guys don't know what you're doing. Your beliefs are antiquated. We don't believe anything you say. You know, so that's possible. I still tend to believe that the lifespans of the people in the millennial period are going to be much longer than that of man today, because all of the curses that we're under, right? Why did God shorten our life? Because we were evil. My spirit will not contend with man forever. Therefore, his days shall be 100 years, or whatever, right? So he cursed us with these short lives. And so those curses are no longer in play during the millennial period. And so I think that's another supportive argument for people living longer than the standard 80 to 100 years. But
I agree with you, Dave. When we put all these scriptures together, indeed, God at one point decided that our lives would be much shorter because of our behaviors. But in the millennium, when the knowledge of God will be covering the earth, and everyone will be following the laws of God, and at least they will be taught and observing the commandments and the feasts and the food. The planet will be cleansed. Of its pollution and all of this. So the air won't be polluted as it is now. So the conditions will be in place, I think, for a much healthier and longer life.
Yeah, and you know, as I always say, one thing is certain: we'll find out eventually.
when Moses wrote Psalm 90, when he wrote that our time is 80 years and 10, and by reason of strength they be 80 years. So we would be saying that 80 years is because they were cursed. But I'm not thinking they didn't have the pollution like we have now, so their air would have been a lot purer then. But I mean, you know, what I mean, and that's where I'm basing my 100 years. You know what I mean? I'm thinking, why would a child, if they're not cursed anymore, why is a child even dying at 100 years old? You know, I would think that would have been the end of his lifespan. But yeah, I see your points also. But that's where I was coming from. You know.
Yeah, and you're not alone in that understanding. You know, there are others that hold to that same interpretation. I tend to look at it, you know, God's removing those curses, and you know, to your point, if it wasn't for modern medicine, our lifespans would be much shorter than they are. We would have far more young people dying, but because of our ability to keep people alive that by all rights should be dead, you know, it increases our lifespans.
Dave, do you want to put that verse again? I mean, that started discussion, please?
It's
65.
Yeah, it's Isaiah 65,
20. Okay. Why, if we look at it, okay, no more shall there be an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who dies not fill out his days. For the young man shall die at 100 years old. So if we look just at this, the last two things, an old man, why would they say, why would he describe or talk about an old man who does not fill out his days? And then just next to it, it says, for the young man shall die 100 years old. So, I mean, that's the old man as well, or what? I mean, why would there be the two side by side? It doesn't fit. I mean, it would be the old man that dies at 100 years old. So,
yeah.
I mean, no point in saying an old man and then just next to it, for the young man shall die 100 years old. So it means there must be a difference between an old man and a young man.
Yeah, and that's kind of the contrast that I see as well, is that
But you know, then I look at the next verse, and the sinner 100 years old should be accursed. So is he dying at 100, or is he? Why? It just seems like that 100 years is a number there. That why is a sinner should be accursed for 100 years old? You know. So
well, if you basically, it's saying, as I read it, right, it's saying that basically, if you die at 100 years, that's going to be abnormal. You know, it says for the young man, it says, well, so no more, right? No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. Why is that? Right? For a young man shall die at 100 years old, and the sinner at 100 years old shall be accursed. I think it is drawing a contrast and saying those latter two things are no longer going to be the case. We're no longer going to have an infant who lives but a few days, because a young man, if they died at 100 years old, would be considered equivalent to an infant who lives but a few days. So the lifespan is going to be very different than what we have today, in my view.
Yeah, I can see that now. You know?
So, like I said, it's not something that is going to
No, I understand. It was just, it was, you know, I always looked at that a little different, but you made a good point there, you know? Because I was just thinking that, you know, why is the young man even dying?
And it does
That's
read kind of
all,
funny, to your point. It's like, what, why,
you know,
why
what
those
if
two
it,
things together? A young man shall die at 100 years old, and the sinner 100 years old shall be accursed.
yeah, so I was just looking at, just saying that you're gonna be a young man, the lifespan, 100 years, but, and that, just, very good.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on then. We'll cover chapter 66, and then I think we'll call it a wrap. So in verse 1, it says, "Thus says Yehovah, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me? And what is the place of my rest? All these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be, declares Yehovah. But this is the one to whom I will look, he who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word." Very different than that haughty, proud, arrogant attitude that is going to be dealt with. He who slaughters an ox is like one who kills a man. He who sacrifices a lamb like one who breaks a dog's neck. He who presents a grain offering like one who blesses an idol. These have chosen their own ways, and their soul delights in their abominations. And this is the thing that modern religion has done. You see, they're not unlike politicians. They conform to the masses. The masses, they don't want to hear that they have to keep the Sabbath, that they have to refrain from eating pig's flesh, that they have to pay tithes, that they have to keep the feasts, that they have to do all of these things, right? Thou shalt not, thou shalt, all of these rules and regulations. They don't like it. I want to do what I want to do. I want something that makes me feel good, right? And so what do? They establish religious institutions that make people feel good. They conform to the will of the people. And they have chosen their own ways, and their soul delights in their abominations. I will choose harsh treatment for them and bring their fears upon them, because when I called, no one answered. That calling we talked about earlier. Anybody who's listening to this, pay attention. When I spoke, they did not listen. But they did what was evil in my eyes and chose that in which I did not delight. And that's what we're all called out of. We are called to forget those things that we were doing before and go down a new path. Hear the word of Yehovah, you who tremble at his word. Your brothers who hate you and cast you out for my name's sake have said, let Yehovah be glorified, that we may see your joy. But it is they who shall be put to shame. The sound of an uproar from a city, the sound from the temple, the sound of Yehovah rendering recompense to his enemies. There is a day of judgment coming, brethren, and it's quite possible that we're going to be alive to see it. Continuing on verse 7, before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came upon her, she delivered a son. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall a land be born in one day? Shall a nation be brought forth in one moment? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she brought forth her children. Shall I bring to the point of birth and not cause to bring forth? Says Yehovah. Shall I, who cause to bring forth, shut the womb? Yes, Francois.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Says your God, Rejoice with Jerusalem and be glad for her, all you who love her. Rejoice with her in joy, all you who mourn over her. That you may nurse and be satisfied from her consoling breast, that you may drink deeply with delight from her glorious abundance. You see, Jerusalem and the nation of Israel as a whole is going to be a blessing on the earth. For thus says Jehovah, behold, I will extend peace to her like a river, and the glory of the nations like an overflowing stream. And you shall nurse, you shall be carried upon her hip, and bounce upon her knees. As one whom his mother comforts, so I will comfort you. You shall be comforted in Jerusalem. You shall see, and your heart shall rejoice. Your bones shall flourish like the grass, and the hand of Jehovah shall be known to his servants, and he shall show his indignation against his enemies. We do not want to be an enemy of Jehovah when that day comes. There is still time for repentance. For behold, Jehovah will come in fire, and his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger in fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire will Jehovah enter into judgment, and by his sword with all flesh, and those slain by the Lord shall be many. By Jehovah shall be many. Those who sanctify and purify themselves, and go into the gardens, following one in the midst, eating pig's flesh, and the abomination and mice shall come to an end together, declares Jehovah. For I know their works and their thoughts, and the time is coming to gather all nations and tongues, and they shall come and shall see my glory. That's going to be a great day. And I will set a sign upon them, and from them I will send survivors to the nations of Tarshish, Pul, and Lud, who draw the bow, to Tubal and Javan, to the coastlands far away, that have not heard my fame or seen my glory, and they shall declare my glory among the nations. And they shall bring all your brothers from all the nations as an offering to Jehovah, on horses and in chariots and in litters and on mules and on dromedaries, to my holy mountain Jerusalem, says Jehovah, just as the Israelites bring their grain offering in a clean vessel to the house of Jehovah. And some of them also I will take for priests and for Levites, says Jehovah. For as the new heavens and the new earth that I make shall remain before me, says Jehovah, so shall your offspring and your name remain. And from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares Jehovah. You think the new moon's not a day of worship? Why would they be doing that? And the last verse 24, and they shall go out and look on the dead bodies of the men who have rebelled against me, for their worm shall not die, their fire shall not be quenched, and they shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. In that day, when Christ returns and executes the judgment on this planet that his Father has warned us about repeatedly, then we will know that he alone is Jehovah, and he alone is the creator and sustainer of this earth and all in the universe. So, brethren, we'll close the study there, unless anybody has any commentary on anything I just covered. We'll cover that first. But, there is a glorious time coming. Unfortunately, there are hard times coming in between. But if we are steadfast and diligent we don't have to be perfect, but we have to be sincere. We have to desire the truth, a desire to obey our Father in heaven. And we can't just put on airs of righteousness. And we can't just put an outward show of religion we have to be sincere. We have to live our beliefs. And those beliefs have to be based on the truths we find in Scripture. So I hope that the study was worthwhile. I think I've learned a few things during this study, so it was useful to me, and I hope it was to you too. Then we'll end with that. We will have our final hymn, and then we'll close our formal service.